Section 2A1. Representation period. What it is. The start and end dates of the agreement. How to fill it in. 1. Beginning date. Enter the date when the representation starts. Many brokers use today's date, the date of signing, unless there's a specific future start date. 2. Ending date at 11:59 p.m. Enter the end date of the agreement. After 11:59 p.m. on that date, the representation period is over unless there's a separate continuation period under 2E3. 3. Or upon completion of a resulting transaction. Explain that if the buyer successfully closes on a property before that end date, the representation period ends when that transaction is completed. 4. 3-month maximum rule for consumers. For individual buyers, not entities, this agreement generally cannot exceed 3 months. If you write a longer period for an individual buyer, the agreement may be invalid under California Civil Code Section 1670.50. Entities like corporations, LLCs, or partnerships may go longer, as allowed by law and broker policy. Section 2A, type of representation. There are 2 options. 1. Non-exclusive. This is the default if you leave it as is. The buyer authorizes your brokerage to represent them, but they could technically sign with other brokers as well. 2. Exclusive, box to check. Buyer agrees to work only with this broker for the property types and locations described in the agreement. This option is valid only if the exclusive box here is checked and the party's initial paragraph 15 later in the form. Section 2B. Property to be acquired, property. This section narrows down what kind of property and where you're helping the buyer. The gray wording at the top basically says, the broker and any associate licensee working through the broker will provide services only for the property types and locations described here. Section 2B1, Property Type. You'll see several checkboxes. This is where you define the categories of property covered by the agreement. Explain each option. 1. Single-family residential, SFR. Typical homes, condos, townhomes, and manufactured homes. There's a small option box indicating that if it is checked, SFR is excluded, meaning you're not representing for SFR, only for the other types you check. Walk your students through that nuance. 2. Multifamily 2 to 4 units. Duplex, triplex, fourplex. 3. 5 or more units. Larger apartment buildings. 4. Industrial. 5. Vacant land. 6. Commercial. 7. Tenancy in common, where multiple parties own fractional interests, often used for certain investment structures. 8. The following specified property, IS, only with a blank line. Use this when the agreement is limited to one or more specific addresses or projects. Section 2B2 Location. Here you narrow the geographic area. Fields. 1. County IS line. 2. City IS line. How to use it. 1. Be as clear as possible about where you're representing the buyer. 2. You can list specific counties, specific cities. In Section 2B2, we define where we're working. If your buyer is only shopping in Alameda and Santa Clara counties, write those in. If it's just the city of Fremont or San Jose, list those cities. The more precise you are, the clearer everyone's expectations will be. Section 2B3, Additional Description. Use this section to capture extra details of the search, things like price range, bedroom count, or special needs. It's not required, but it can help align expectations and show you've really listened to your buyer. Section 2C, Additional Buyer Preferences and Priorities. There is a checkbox for additional buyer preferences and priorities and a reference to an attached form, CAR BPP. Check the box if you are attaching the buyer identification of preferences and priorities form. That separate form can go into greater detail about wants versus needs, preferred features, locations, budget, etc. That extra document becomes part of the agreement and helps to confirm the buyer's expectations. Section 2D. Properties excluded from representation. This part lists properties the broker is not earning compensation on, even if the buyer purchases them. You have lines where you can write specific addresses or descriptions, or A box indicating that excluded properties are on an attached list. Common uses. 1. Buyer already has another broker for a particular property. 2. Buyer is already in negotiations on a property before signing this agreement. 3. An immediate family member is selling to the buyer without broker involvement. Section 2E. Broker compensation. The bold notice reminds everyone that real estate commissions are not set by law and are negotiable between broker and buyer. It also references the Broker Compensation Advisory, BCA, form for more explanation. Section 2E1. Amount of compensation. Here you and the buyer agree on how much the broker is to be paid if compensation is owed. You'll typically see 3 options. 1. Percentage plus optional flat amount. Example, 2.5% of the acquisition price and, if any, $0. This sets a percentage of the final purchase price, and you may also include a fixed dollar amount if negotiated. 2. Flat dollar amount only. Example, $10, 000. The buyer agrees the broker's compensation for the transaction is a set dollar figure. 3. Attached compensation schedule. Check this if your brokerage uses a separate written schedule. For example, different percentages for different price ranges. Section 2E2. Payments received by broker from seller or others. This paragraph explains what happens if the broker gets paid by someone other than the buyer, usually the seller or listing broker. Key points to explain. 1. If the broker receives compensation from a seller or another party for representing the buyer, that amount is credited toward what the buyer agreed to pay in Section 2E1. Example, if Section E1 says the broker is entitled to $15,000 and the listing firm pays your brokerage $10,000 through the MLS, the buyer's remaining obligation would typically be $5,000, subject to the exact contract language and any legal advice. 2. The broker cannot receive more than the total amount agreed to in Section 2E1, regardless of where the money comes from. Section 2E3. Continued right to payment for broker-involved properties. This is the tail or continuation period. 1. You fill in a number of calendar days. 2. This period starts right after the representation period, including any extension, ends. 3. During this continuation period, if the buyer closes on a property the broker was involved with during the representation period, for example, shown, discussed, or negotiated, the broker may still be entitled to compensation as defined in the agreement. Section F. Cancellation rights and notice. This explains how and when the buyer or broker can cancel the agreement and when that cancellation becomes effective. There are different rules for 1. Non-exclusive agreements. Cancellation usually becomes effective when notice is received or after a specified number of days you enter in the blank, depending on what you choose on the form. 2. Exclusive agreements. By default, cancellation is effective 30 days after notice is received, or a shorter period you can write in, but not more than 30 days. Important points to remember. 1. Cancellation normally must be in writing and delivered as the contract specifies. 2. Cancellation does not necessarily erase the broker's right to compensation for transactions covered by any continuation period or properties already involved. Section 2G1. Time to deliver buyer's information. This sets a deadline for the buyer to provide financial or personal information needed for the representation. Fields. Default. Within 5 calendar days from execution of the agreement. Or you can write in a different number of days. There's also an option to indicate that the CARB of PI, buyer financial and personal information, form is attached. Section 2G2. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay broker. There's a checkbox here. If you check it, you're saying 1. The buyer doesn't have enough money to directly pay the broker's compensation from their own funds. Therefore, 2. The broker's obligation to represent the buyer in a transaction is conditional on a seller or someone else agreeing to pay the amount described in paragraph 2E1. Practical effect. This is often used when the buyer is relying entirely on a seller-paid commission. If no seller agrees to pay, the broker may not be required to proceed for the agreement language. Section 2H. Other terms. This is a blank area for custom terms agreed between the buyer and broker, subject to broker and legal approval. H is where you can add any extra terms that your broker and legal counsel approve, things like communication expectations or rules for visiting new construction sales offices. Don't improvise legal language here. Always follow your brokerage's templates and legal guidance.